It is Locked On Jazz for the 2nd of September. Reports that the Utah Jazz have traded Donovan Mitchell to the Cleveland Cavaliers. The rebuild is in full throttle, pedal down, engine roaring. What does it mean? What did the Jazz receive if this deal goes through? What is the timeline and what have they accumulated through all of it? We're talking about it coming up on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Pow!
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Give you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and any podcasting app. So thank you very much for tuning in. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated. Thumbs up on the YouTube video is there as well. And please just give me an old for your team every day mention in the chat so I know you're there. Glad to have you aboard. For those of you who tried to join our live show, we apologize. The hotel internet was not good enough to do it, so we are just doing it the old school way without being able to interact personally. So the reports that came out yesterday, and apologize, this is a little later than I'd like to be on an emergency pod, but I was literally boarding a plane. For those of you in Salt Lake City, I was out at a B gate, so I was like in Ogden, and I was on one of those little shuttles to a B gate when the news broke. Actually did a Hans and Scotty interview while literally sitting on that bus. And then been with family, so haven't been able to react as quickly as maybe I usually would have. So the reports are the Jazz have traded Donovan Mitchell to the Cleveland Cavaliers, not the New York Knicks, in exchange for an unprotected pick in 2025, 2027, 2029, pick swaps in 2026 and 2028. Collin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, and the 14th pick of the draft that just happened out of Kansas, Ochai Agbaji, comes to the Jazz. Now, there's a bunch of aspects of this deal. We'll talk about like the inner workings of the deal. We'll talk about why. We'll talk about who Collin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen and why they're important if this, as reported, happens. We'll talk about the accumulation of picks in the two deals, and we'll talk about the timeline that the Jazz have. Like how long does a rebuild last? So all of that is coming up for you on the show today. And so sorry, I think we're having a minor, I think I've got it figured out. Hard to do things from the hotel. So here's what we've got for you on this. The first thing is on the trade. I actually think the pick accumulation is really important, and the pick years are important. Cleveland couldn't actually, they have a pick off of the Karis LeVert trade that they made. They couldn't actually give the Jazz 2023 or 2024. Jazz didn't actually want 2023. The Jazz already have the Nets pick, the Timberwolves pick, and their own pick next year. And their own pick looks like it's going to be very good. 2024, the Jazz have their own pick. 2025, that pick probably, if Cleveland holds with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, and whatever they do, and they probably get better in the meantime, filling that gap in. That's probably not 2025 might not be the greatest asset in the world, as reported. But by 2026 and 27, who knows? 27 is post-Donovan's free agency. The way the league rules work right now, you're not going to be able to sign someone to it. The Cleveland's got a major risk here, is with the cap bumping the way it's going to. Cleveland's not going to be able to sign Donovan to an extension. He's going to go to free agency. New York is going to loom. LA is going to loom. I've always thought Donovan was going to end up with the Clippers, to be honest. When Kawhi and Paul George's timetable works up, they've got their new building. Ballmer's got that thing rocking. I'm a 29-year-old. At that point, I want to live in LA, not New York. That's my thought. Then the 2029 pick, same thing with the Minnesota pick and the Cleveland pick. What's interesting here is the Jazz have made two trades, if this trade is as reported, in which they are not trading with major free agent markets. Like if something goes wrong in Minnesota and Cleveland, they're just like us. They can't sign free agents. No one's signing to go up to go live in Cleveland. No one's signing to go live in Minnesota. And so if Anthony Edwards somehow bumps from where in Minnesota wants to go, or Darius Garland or Evan Mobley or something goes awry, those are not franchises that can rebuild this situation and get this back to working. And so, therefore, the 2027 and the 2029 picks really might be the most valuable in this. Now, Cleveland's super young, right? Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, Allen are all, I think, 26 or younger. So they could lead this to go for a while, but that we all know how well that lasts. And that's what's important here when we get to timeline today is the structure of that pick. So the fact that those picks are later seems to me to be good. The other part of this is that Collin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen begin a timetable, or at least a path of players. Sexton reportedly will be signing a 4-year, $70 million deal. He's good. He's a former top 10 pick. He's got some point guard skills. He's not a natural point guard. He can really score. He scored his last full season. He scored over 37 times. And so there's a bunch of pieces. So there's your first piece, is a young guard, young, athletic, scoring guard, 6'1", a little smaller than you might like, 6'6" wingspan, so plus wingspan. That's your first piece. Now, in the Minnesota trade with Rudy Gobert, there weren't really pieces in a timeline. There weren't really pieces, right? Balmero's an interesting piece. Kessler was the first-round draft pick, 22nd pick. Vanderbilt's a nice compliment. Malik Beasley, we'll see whether he stays with us or not. And we've already moved Patrick Beverley. This, I think, is the beginning of building some pieces that move the Jazz forward. Collin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen. Markkanen was the 9th pick of the draft out of 1 year in Arizona. You just don't get 7-footers that can shoot 40% from three. Now, that's an unusual thing. We used to want 7-footers that banged and did all this kind of stuff. But Markkanen is a 7-footer who's played the 3 and the 4, did the 3 pretty well last year. Defensively is not great, nor is Sexton, who can really shoot it. He shot 40% from 3 last year, 36 before. Everyone who was in Chicago during the Jim Boylan era feels it was kind of a lost stretch of time where just things weren't done particularly well. So he goes to Cleveland. He takes a nice jump. That's a nice piece. And he signed an extension last year. So that's 3 years. So you're now beginning to see in a rapidly fast fashion pieces of this timeline coming together. So Sexton and Markkanen in this deal. Agbaji, the 14th pick of the draft, and Kessler, the 22nd pick of the draft. We'll see. I talk about this all the time. 50% of players after the 11th pick of the first round become rotation players. Only 50%. Maybe the Jazz got 2 of them. They weren't players. Danny's one of the great drafters of all time, Danny Ainge, and he didn't really make these picks. So these aren't probably under his. They're just picks that other people made, and we made trades with them. I don't have the feeling that we went to Minnesota and said, "Hey, will you draft Walker Kessler, who's going to make a Rudy Gobert trade?" And we certainly didn't in late June say, "Hey, by the way, on September 1st, we're going to make a reported Donovan Mitchell trade with you. So could you draft Agbaji on that day?" So these are not players that Danny, who's got one of the great draft track records, took, but they are players that are now part of our timeline. And in addition to that, we've got these other pieces. Balmero, Fontecchio, who we signed out of Europe. Maybe Balmero develops, right, as a piece of the puzzle. We've got these other players, Talen Horton-Tucker, that we got from the Patrick Beverley trade, that we're starting to piece together and see whether or not these new pieces have an addition. Add Doak, add Jared Butler to that mix as well, and you now have what is the beginning of the core of the rebuild. And part of a rebuild is we're going to be adding, hopefully, electrifying, unbelievable pieces through the draft in the next 3 years. While then, and we'll get into this on timeline, these other pieces either develop or they don't develop, and they're the beginning of it. So that's what we have here. We have the Jazz have the trade as reported. The Jazz have gone into full rebuild mode. I would expect that Bojan and Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson all get moved. We are beginning to see a team that now has a timeline. Sexton and Markkanen are two pieces that are good, solid, top 10 draft pick, NBA rotation pieces. You're seeing a team that suddenly just got the 14th and the 22nd pick of the draft. So there's two more. And in the process, have acquired some other interesting pieces. Balmero, Taylor Horton-Tucker, Fontecchio, from other pieces. And now you have this, and plus we have Butler and we have Doak already. So now you're beginning to see this, and we'll see. And no, it's not going to win a lot of games early on, and it's going to take some time. So why would you possibly do this? Why would you do it? We'll touch on that as we continue. Special edition Locked On Jazz brought to you by our friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. The Hyundai, just fabulous. I'm on my third one. Like, I'm not just blowing smoke here. This isn't like, I mean, this is a paid advertisement, don't kid ourselves. But it's not like a paid advertisement and then I blow smoke. I'm actually a paid advertisement. It's the first time somebody's ever advertised with a company, and I've actually lost money on the deal because I just keep buying cars from them. Got two Santa Fe's, just got the incredible electric Ioniq. It's absolutely fabulous. What do I find every time I research it? I find that I get more bells, more whistles, more safety features, more benefit for less money than I am anywhere else. That's the value proposition of the Hyundai, and dealing with the Murdochs is absolutely outstanding. That's all at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. If you're going to stop by, email me first. I'll set you up with Cam and Murray, Jake down in Linden, get you VIP set up, get you all set up before you get there. Feel free to email me first at dlock09@gmail.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Hey, if you're a football fan, the Ultimate NFL Preview has launched on the Ultimate feed. Go check out the Ultimate NFL Preview. It's in coordination with Odyssey. It's absolutely unbelievable. Conference previews all the way across the board, or divisional previews all the way across the board. So make sure you grab those if you're getting ready for the NFL season as your second listen. So let's back up to why. The Rudy Gobert trade, the first of this piece. So the first thing is that the Jazz as a team never could overcome its scars. We can dig in deeper. We can look at the Desmond Bane miss in the draft. We can look at the Derek Favors signing and then having to give up a pick. But the fact is the Jazz had gotten themselves completely hamstrung with no picks, no free agency, no cap room. And the team was heading internally and on the court in the wrong direction. Right? We just never got over the scar of the Denver loss, never got over the scar of the Clipper loss, and then this last year just couldn't progress through it. So rolling it back seemed unlikely. We talked about this a lot. Your first route is to go see what you can do and how you can build. Minnesota comes with a massive package. It will be interesting in retrospect to know, were the Jazz really looking to trade Rudy Gobert at that point, or was the trade package so outstanding that the Jazz did it? And it could be either of the two. There is a legitimate argument that having a $40 million tied up in a center with no offensive skills, as dominantly great as he is defensively, prohibits you from winning in a championship. That is some people's viewpoint. I'm not sure where I feel on that because I think we all know, I believe Rudy's just, a 52, 53 win automatic seemingly every season. He's on your roster. He's just that dominant. But there's no question his lack of offense in the playoffs is a problem, and teams have gotten better at moving him, and so there is a trend that his impact defensively could be less. So the trading Rudy Gobert was the right move with that package. It is not entirely clear that the rebuild had totally happened at that point, or whether or not maybe the plan at that point was let's build around Donovan Mitchell. The key to building around Donovan Mitchell is that Donovan Mitchell had to want to be built around. And it is not totally clear that Donovan Mitchell wanted to be built around. So even if the Jazz desire at that point was to build around Donovan Mitchell and rebuild this the way exactly how Danny Ainge did with Paul Pierce, the key to that is that Donovan Mitchell has to want to do that. And I'm not clear on where Donovan Mitchell stood on that. It was clear, I think, to everyone involved that when Donovan became a free agent, the chances of him staying in Utah were slim. And this is a subtle thing, but the cap is going to make a huge jump. And when the cap makes this huge jump, it means you will not be able to sign players to extensions to prevent them from going to free agency. So there's just zero chance that Donovan doesn't go to free agency when his player option comes up. So the Jazz could have tried to build around Donovan Mitchell if Donovan Mitchell was willing, but they would have known his free agency was looming. It's not even clear that Donovan wanted to wait that long. At that point, because of this same situation with the free agency issue there and the inability to sign an extension, I missed on something. I thought that the Jazz could probably wait a year on this with both Rudy and Donovan and have their value be the exact same as it is today. On Rudy, I still think that might have been true unless some of the number trends that I've shared with you over the last year, where he's defending about 15% fewer shots a game and about 10% fewer shots a game at the rim, continue. Then maybe not. But with Donovan, I'm not sure. If you had not traded Donovan today, or if they don't trade Donovan when the deal goes officially, you would end up, I think, being beholden to New York, or at least the Charlottes, the Orlandos, if they were actually involved. The Clevelands could not have been as interested, because if you're a year and a half away from his free agency, or a year away from his free agency, or two, it's a much more difficult task. Cleveland is saying, hey, we'll make a run at it now. If, in fact, you leave in free agency, we'll deal with that then. You're an incredible asset, and you're worth it, and we'll get the years. But if we'd gotten further down the line, I think the Jazz are beholden to the Knicks at that point. So the Gobert trade, now the Donovan trade. Okay, so now why? But why still would we do this? We had two of the top 20 players in the NBA. If you're the Utah Jazz and you're trying to build to win a championship over the next, let's call it 20 years, you want to win a championship in the next, I know that sounds long. How is this, the way the Utah Jazz, the route by which, if you were a stockbroker, CEO, business plan, you're going to investors, you're saying we're going to win a championship, you're trying to build a model. The way you're going to do it, if you said we're going to go build through free agency, nobody would invest in it, right? Nobody would believe that. If you say we're going to do it through draft and asset movement, that's the answer. Trades. That's the only answer. The biggest free agent we've ever signed in the history of our franchise is Bojan Bogdanovic, maybe Carlos Boozer. We're not going to be able to sign players as free agents. Same way Cleveland can't, same way Minnesota can't, same way most. That's not unique to us, by the way. I hate that when it's talked about that way. It's about 23 of the 30 franchises are not free agent destinations. Maybe even 25. So if we're going to start this process of trying to become a championship caliber franchise, to win a championship, and not just be 52 wins every year. I've said it. Play-by-play announcer thinks 52 wins is great. Owner, GM, head coach, players, not so much. Fans, we had the poll question on our YouTube yesterday about that. So you're now going to try to get as many assets as you possibly can. Right now, what the Utah Jazz have done is they have Collin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen as their first. They got 2 first-round picks from last year, the 14th pick in Agbaji, the 22nd pick in Walker Kessler. They got a bunch of these other pieces that may or may not develop. They have 3 first-round, if this trade goes as reported, they have 3 first-round picks in 2023. They have a first-round pick in 2024 and maybe a pick swap there too. One of these years they have a pick swap. Maybe it's 2026 in Minnesota. 2025, they now have the Cavaliers' first-round pick. They have the Timberwolves' first-round pick, and they have their own first-round pick. 2026, they have their pick, a pick swap, and I think that's where they have another Timberwolves pick swap. In 2027, they have their first-round pick. They have Cleveland's first-round pick, if this goes as reported. They have Minnesota's first-round pick, unprotected. 2028, they have the pick swap and their own. And 2029, they have their own first-round pick. They have Minnesota's first-round pick, protected 1 through 5. Cleveland's unprotected. I think there's a real chance they have the Lakers 27 and 29 picks by the time we're done here. You might be able to get something with some protections for Mike Conley or Malik Beasley or Jordan Clarkson or also Bojan Bogdanovic. And by the time we're done, the Jazz should have 18 to 19 first-round picks between now and 2029. That is your asset accumulation that you now start to use to build the franchise with these pieces and start to maneuver them, and which of them work, and which pick's valuable, and how are we using this, and how do we build this. And that is why you do this. You build the infrastructure with a Danny Ainge and a Justin Zanuck and Ryan Smith's ownership, and then you bring in your head coach and Will Hardy, and you let him start to build this, and you now build this with these massive accumulation of assets over this period of time. And that's why you do this. Because if you're trying to build a championship in Utah, this is the route you're taking. And it's hard and it's painful, and our 45 jerseys will loom in our closets, and our 27 jerseys will loom in our closets, and we'll have heartburn from it. There's no question. Those guys are great. Love them. Think they're terrific. Will be interesting to see what they do in their next spots. I'm super curious to watch Donovan. I'm super curious to watch Rudy, frankly, and see whether or not some of Rudy's playoff weaknesses go out the window when he suddenly had a different team and it was actually our roster makeup, not Rudy's makeup. I'm super interested to see whether Donovan can help another team win, and how he assimilates in, and what his evolution of his career is from his early stage of who he was in Utah and how he's evolved as an all-star. I'm super curious. Minnesota, Cleveland, NBA Finals, I'm all for it for the next few years. It doesn't make it any easier, but it is this is the approach. This is the route. This is how you do this. So how long? What is the timeline? Impossible to answer, but I will try to do my best for you as we continue on Locked On Jazz. By the way, it does mean that your second listen with regularity should become Locked On NBA Big Board. Great work there from all the guys. It's a crew led by Rafael Barlow, and then a crew of super good Leaf, Tulane, Richard, Sam, really, 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 really good NBA draft experts every single day. Speaking of that, I asked all of them about Agbaji, who I don't know anything about. Richard Stamen, who is at Mavs Draft on Twitter, said, sharpshooter, really athletic, best in the open court. You'll see his head get to the rim on dunks. Always knows where his shooters are, cuts well too. More meaningfully, his defense is a question mark despite good physical abilities. If he improves there, he's a quality 3 and D guy. I asked Leaf, excuse me. Now I'm so dyslexically confused. Think 3 and D to a T. Good run and jump athlete, but does not create for himself. Reminds me of Danny Green, Reggie Bullock. Thrived in his last 2 seasons at Kansas after being a player removed from a redshirt season due to his necessity. He was born in Milwaukee, grew up in Kansas City, was kind of a Kansas City level. Sam, who's draft dummies on Twitter, said 6'5"-ish wing who can shoot it, guard 2s and 3s, older player who's ready to play now. Feels like a solid 4th or 5th starter in his most likely outcome, probably not the highest ceiling due to his age and development. So that's the 14th pick of the draft, who the Jazz have reportedly acquired from the Cleveland Cavaliers. We're just coming across that I believe that the original report on Danilo Gallinari not having a torn ACL is wrong. That's too bad. That could be career-ending for Gallinari at this point with that career. All right, so what's the timeline? How long until we see the Jazz start winning basketball games? So the way I envision this happening is that what you've got your 2 little scales here. One is, if you're going to go through a rebuild and acquire great talent, you're the team that's probably going to have to acquire the top 10 talent. Danny Ainge got very, very fortunate with Brooklyn, torpedoing and just collapsing and sinking like the Titanic, that he got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown out of those picks. That's unusual. So what we need to do now over the next, let's call it 3 to 4 years, is try to acquire through the draft the major, awesome, unbelievable franchise pieces that are going to lead us into the next version of the Utah Jazz. So that's the 23 draft, 24 draft, 25 draft, and maybe even the 26. You don't hit on all of them. So for the next 3 or 4 years, this is what you see. And Collin Sexton is probably a part of this if this trade goes through as reported. And Markkanen's maybe we find out that Agbaji or Kessler really has a role, and maybe Balmero develops, but then we trade Vanderbilt and we move this, and maybe we find out that, whatever, right? You're just moving pieces. So after the Jazz have gone through acquiring draft picks for the next 3 to 4 seasons, and hopefully you have some of those pieces, right? We have our version of whatever Jalen Green and Jabari Smith and whoever Houston gets in this next year, our Cade Cunningham, our Jalen Ivey, whatever Detroit has, as they're doing the same thing. Then we start to rise up the win total in 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, and these players are young and developing, they're building, and they're getting really, really good, and we're starting to really, really win. Now our draft picks don't have the same value. They're not top 10 picks, hopefully, anymore. This is where the way the Jazz have done this rebuild is so smart. Now, as we become better in 2027, 2028, 2029, hopefully we get Minnesota or Cleveland unprotected pick in 2027, torpedoes, and all of a sudden our team that's already on the rise at 45, 50, 52, 55 wins gets this bounce from the bottom of a draft pick from one of these picks from Cleveland or Minnesota, and now you really catapult it up. Maybe that happens in 2029. Maybe that happens in the pick swap of 2028. Maybe that happens on the Lakers picks if we actually get those coming up in 2027 or 2029. But that's the timeline that I would see. I would suspect, 3 or 4 years of acquiring high first-round draft picks as young players are developing and learning and developing. And then as we move our way up and suddenly our draft picks are now the 15th and the 22nd and the 26th of the draft, and they're not as valuable, that's when these trades kick in. When the 2029 pick in Cleveland is suddenly the 5th pick of the NBA draft unprotected. When the 2029 Timberwolves pick is suddenly the 10th pick of the draft unprotected, and you're combining those to go get your next star. Or the 2027 pick of Cleveland is the 11th pick, and the 2027 pick of Minnesota is the 14th pick, and you have your own, and you work it up to go get that next piece because it's clear what you need and there's perfect fits. That's the timeline that I see for how this works and how it's modeled and how it ideally comes together. So it's going to take, there's some pain, but it's modeled in a fashion that if we can start the uptick, we are going to be, our backfill of talent is coming from these picks. All right, those are the main things I had for you. Appreciate you very much. It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, take a break from basketball. Go listen to the ultimate NFL preview and get ready for the NFL season. Or listen to Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars with their big games this weekend. Have a great one. Talk to you later.